Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are listening from, and welcome to 1% Better, where we take a look at hidden stories in sports. I'm Zalin Faneg, and I'm joined by Dr. David Lipman. This week's medical question to you is, what's one key difference between neuromuscular fatigue and metabolic fatigue in endurance athletes? Hit me.
This is complicated. Metabolic fatigue you'll see manifesting more metabolically, I guess. So you'll see lower lactate levels, things like that. Whereas with neuromuscular fatigue, you're going to see that manifest in things like reduced force outputs, etc. More so, I'd say, is probably the way this will be answered. There are researchers who would be arguing these things don't really like it. It's not as common. Like anyway, it's messy. It's messy, controversial territory.
The answer I have here is neuromuscular fatigue originates in the central nervous system, while metabolic fatigue comes from the peripheral muscle factors like low glycogen.
So
Um,
that's not a difference in them. That's how they're created.
so basically, one is in the muscles, the other is in the brain, saying we're done here, which is
Or the
fantastic.
spinal cord.
Which is interesting. Multiple places from the multiple systems in the body saying, like in a marathon, for instance, after 35 kilometers,
No,
saying,
no, not multiple systems. No. That's not how it works. There's one system that's predominant, and the others are like they all contribute. Fatigue is always multifactorial, but you're not going to have the same fatigue. Like a marathon and a 5K have different limiters, and therefore different. The fatigue is slightly different. You understand what I'm saying? Like it's like it's all dimmer switches of everything, and
yeah.
some systems are going to be more impactful on that performance, and therefore the fatigue manifests slightly differently. But
Well,
again, the differences between them, like it's like saying, what's the difference between black and white? Well, the difference is that they're colors, and one is black and one is white. You're like,
mm.
that's not really a difference. Like, anyway, carry on.
No, I'm just meaning it's great. It's great how complex the body is and how the body has multiple factors. It's almost many fail safes, for want of a better term, you know?
Well, fatigue as we experience it is more like my synthesis of it, and this is not what researchers would agree with necessarily, but it's mostly like more similar to an emotion than anything else, which is to say a bunch of things are happening. We've got all these inputs that are coming back to us, and our understanding is fatigue.
Mm.
It's us making sense of a bunch of signals that are coming back, a mixture of pH and temperature and hydration and fuel stores and neuromuscular fatigue and muscle damage and all those things, and then we go, I'm tired, and stop.
It's
Right? That's
manifesting
what.
as fatigue.
Yeah, well, it's our interpretation of the situation, right?
Yeah.
So much of what we understand is contextual. So if your heart rate was 150 but you were running really hard, you'd be like, geez, I feel great. And if you're lying in bed, you'd be like, I am sick. Right? So much of it's
Yeah.
contextual. We have to interpret that data.
By the way, it's a new year. We do need to give a shout out to our day ones, Precision Fuel and Hydration, who has supported this podcast literally from day one. What a company. If you've listened to this podcast for a long time, you will know we are big fans of theirs. We've used their product even before they became a partner to us here. So we'd love for you to support them. We do have a discount code for you, 15% off our first purchase. There is a link in the show notes down below that'll directly apply that discount code for you. And I think you said it, David. We failed to mention it a few times. They actually have this very cool free service where if you're unsure how to fuel in an event or in your training, you can book a very free call. Very free. Yeah,
It's
it is
very
very
free. It's
free.
not just free, it's very free.
You can book a free call with
Super
one of the
free.
experts.
It's for an Uber free
uh,
call.
it's Uber free, yes.
Yeah. So
um,
there's also a fuel and hydration planner you can do sort of online by yourself. And maybe you do both as a bit of a tester of it all. So they are great. They are supporting us. Thank you very much to Precision. Our other sponsors on this podcast, Stride Running Power Meters. So they've been supporting us for quite a while now. I think it's just over 6 months. Yeah. Run with power. You certainly get the power metrics, which gives you an idea of internal load. But I think the thing for me that's most exciting is the, using the duo, you get a whole bunch of gait metrics. You understand stride lengths and ground contact times and all that. It helps you shoot, like, as a result, it can help you decide between shoes, see the effect of shoes, see your training over time with respect to all of the peripheral metrics. Back to your discussion around central versus peripheral. Most of what we do is heart rate. It's all those things. That's all central. This is about stiffness and all the peripheral factors in the tendons and the muscles. So it gives you an idea there, and it gives you an idea of mechanical loading with running stress balance and those sort of things as well. So they do have their power center. I think is particularly good in terms of pacing plans for different marathons, where you can say, "Hey, I'm running Chicago, and this will be the weather," and they'll say, "Okay, based on that, this is how to pace it using power." But certainly gives a good indication in general, anyway.
I have a major goal in recovering from spinal fusion this year to get back to running because I haven't been able to train. So I haven't been able to use a lot of our partners' products. Obviously, I've still been able to use Precision Fuel and Hydration's electrolytes through my hectic travel schedule I've had the last couple of months, but I've really been bummed not being able to use Stride running power meters. I've got one goal is to keep them as a partner for as long as possible and to use their product. I mean, even if they're not a partner anymore, I'll still keep using. I'm still looking forward to using their product, getting back to running in the second half of this year, hopefully, and testing that out.
All right, mate. Well, let's not bury the lead anymore. This will be the last episode users or listeners will hear you on for quite a while. We're not sure exactly how long, but it will be a while till we hear, well, till they hear your dulcet tones again. I'm sure I'll be getting voice notes from you and all sorts of garbage, but listeners will not hear from you, mate. So, firstly, wish you well from all the listeners and myself. Secondly, everybody bombards Island with social media messages, because that way it'll stress him out, and also, like, he'll feel good about it. He does love the attention. But yeah, so mate, just wanted to wish you best of luck for that, and of course, the podcast will continue, and you'll be back at some point. We've got some cool plans this year, and yeah, mate.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all the support. And it's been a very long journey, and I'm hoping that this will be a big milestone in terms of a turning point where I can actually get my life back after recovery. I definitely won't be rushing the rehab and recovery. I feel like I am really good at taking those things in my stride, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. But all the last few months of support from you, from listeners, has meant a great deal, and I just can't wait to come out on the other side and be active again, man, because that's something we absolutely love as endurance athletes. So that's been one of the toughest. 2025 was one of the toughest years I've gone through in a long time, not being as active as I'd love to be. So I wish the surgeon well. Hope the operation goes well. It's out of my control,
I
and then
wish
I'll
I wish the surgeon a normal day, man. This is the
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Surgery is a huge thing for you, and for him, it's another day at work. And you wish them another day at work.
I've noticed that. Yeah, I've had many surgeries in my life, and that always blows my mind when you go into the operating room how they are discussing their not like in for want of better words their lunch plans, their life plans, their stress. For them, it's just yeah,
Oh
it's just
yeah,
another day.
just like we discuss things like you want it to be that way. Like, to be very clear,
Yeah,
you want them to be at a level where they're so comfortable that, like, this is not a big deal. This is another day. I'm super relaxed here. I'm going to get in the zone and do my work. Right?
yeah.
It's you editing a podcast. It's all those things. You want that to be them.
Right. We've been talking about getting an AI specialist on for a very long time. And I think you found the right person. I was so impressed with her. And I think listeners will not be disappointed. Brinnae knocked it out of the park. What a great chat with her. She brought real good context for that world, the world we all use all the time and mention all the time, but not always maybe have such a good understanding of what it is. So thanks so much to Brene for coming on here and giving us context. And David, thanks for getting her on.
You're welcome, mate. And yeah, listeners, enjoy. And as always, send us feedback, and please rate the podcast if you haven't rated it. That'd be super helpful for us. Of course, subscribing if you haven't subscribed, sharing the podcast to people also helps us grow. All that stuff helps with the algorithm. Engage with us on social, join the Strava group, comment on Spotify, do it all of it, not just one thing. You have to do it all. So yes, I'm joking, but please do those things. Thanks very much.
Professor Brinnae Bent is a faculty member teaching AI and cybersecurity at Duke University, director of Duke Trust Lab, and executive director of Tensor and Trust, a trustworthy AI strategic consulting firm. Brinnae was managing partner and a senior data scientist at Edge Analytics, a boutique machine learning consulting firm. In this role, she led projects and developed algorithms for the largest companies in the world. She is also the co founder of the Digital Biomarker Discovery Pipeline, an open source platform for health algorithms. Across her career, she has created technology for products spanning health and wellness, fitness and sports, privacy, compliance, interior design, and energy forecasting. She graduated magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Science from North Carolina State University. She then completed her Master's of Science at Duke University in Neural Engineering before completing a PhD at Duke in Machine Learning. Beyond Beyond authoring over 35 research papers, Brinnae has delivered a TEDx talk on the future of medicine and courses for Coursera on AI and machine learning. If all of this wasn't enough, she's an award winning artist, an ultra runner, mother to Bentley, and a former top 10 in North America in obstacle course racing. Man, what an intro. I feel like a failure in my life after reading all of that. Brene, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Silent and David, for having me. I don't have a podcast, so you all have already one
Oh,
upped
yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah,
Don't do it. Don't do it. It's a trap.
yeah.
Get out. Get out. Get out while you still can. But you are the perfect podcast guest, especially on this topic. It's something Zylan's been really pushing me to get someone on the podcast for you. I had you in mind from a long time ago. We worked together a little while back. We actually were catching off offline before. It feels like a long time since we've caught up. So this will be a real treat, particularly given some of your recent changes in your life, which is cool. Well, let's start, I guess, at the beginning. Like everything seems to be AI at the moment. You know this better than I do, and some of it is AI, some of it isn't AI. It's being called AI for branding purposes. But what are some projects in the sort of AI sporting realm that are exciting you at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. This is such a great question. When most people think about AI today, they're thinking about like the chatbot, right? They're going to ChatGPT and saying something silly like, "Hey, write me a poem about AI," and then it spits out a poem about AI. And that's what most people think when they think AI. But AI is actually really ubiquitous in our lives. Everything from recommending us products on Amazon to recommending content on Netflix and actually like changing the images that you are shown on Netflix, which is just crazy. Google Maps, if you think about lane assist technology, like these are all forms of AI that are driving our behaviors on a daily basis, but we don't even really think about it. And so when we think about AI, I like to think about it from like the terminology that is like, it's very broad, right? It's just like machines with goals. Most people think a chatbot, and I actually think with sports, chatbots aren't that exciting. In sports, like I want to have that human touch. I think that is so critical when you think about these like personalized coaches and stuff. For me at least, I really want to have that human in the loop. What I find more exciting is applying some of these recommendation algorithms, aggregating patterns across lots and lots of different people in order to make better recommendations for different kinds of sports plans or for injury management plans. I think that is really exciting. And so leveraging a lot of that recommendation algorithm technology or integration with other forms. So, beyond text and images, but looking at different types of sensor data and how we can utilize sensor data, this multimodal sensor data, multiple different sensors, plus maybe some computer vision in there, some image technology, some video technology, in order to better understand people's physiology and their behavior.
So, are you thinking in that context something like, let's use football, European football, as opposed to American football as is played in where you are? I've certainly come across a couple of companies who are doing automatic player tracking using
Mhm.
visual stuff, so you don't have to have sensors on, so it can automatically track
Mhm.
them. It talks about formations the opposition's playing and that sort of stuff. But you could also look at if you paired that with say biomarker technology, let's call it
Mhm.
heart rate, maybe continuous lactate monitors as they come to the market, all of a sudden you can fatigue profile players and then create substitutes at the appropriate time. Tactical stuff will come out of that as well. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Absolutely. Yeah, this multimodal where you have these different sensors, you've got different modalities like images and video technology, and bringing all of this information together. Like that's the real power of artificial intelligence in sports, or at least from my opinion, is aggregating all of this data together because previously you'd have to manually go through all of this, right? You'd have to manually go through all of this and we just don't have the time or resources usually to do that, especially if you think about our more recreational athletes, right? You don't have time to be able to go and analyze every run, but if you have data from every run and you can have an AI system that analyzes that data, now everybody has this level of personalization and better understanding of their own physiology and their own sports progress, which I think is really exciting. And I think pairing that then with that human coach is really where the magic happens because you can aggregate all of this data, take all of this information, but then still have that like human motivation, that human trust component that comes in when you have that human coach.
Did you guys see this story about Laura Harvey, who's the head coach of Seattle Rain FC in North America, where she used ChatGPT to
Yes,
come up with her tactics
I
for
did
her
see this.
against her opponents? Did you see that?
Yeah, I did
I
see
did
this
not see
actually.
this.
She
Tell me
basically
more.
she basically fed it some scenarios and said like what formation should I play, and it spat back the formation and she played it. I think that's pretty. I think there's a couple of uses for AI that are quite interesting in that context. I don't think she learned anything. What I think it did was create a sparring partner for her. So somebody that could be in
Mhm.
the room, like a coaching mentor or someone like that, so she could bounce ideas backwards and forwards. I don't
Mhm.
think she went, "Oh, I'd never thought of playing that formation. I had no idea about this, and now all of a sudden, ChatGPT's revolutionized my life." I think what it provided her is what you would otherwise have in a better resourced environment where you'd have a number of coaches who could challenge each other and say like, how do we solve this problem? Let's go about it. What about this formation? What about that formation? Right. So I think part of that might be to do with, necessity is the mother of invention. And in that context, women's sports not particularly well funded, even at that top level in the US. So wouldn't surprise me if she's got fewer assistant coaches at a high level than she would appreciate. Right. So there's that I think is the case. And then you see it. I think the big data stuff is really where, especially in endurance sports, I think the big data stuff, because as you say very rightly, Brennan, like you don't have time. Like when's the last time Xylin, you, me went back and really analyzed the nuances of our data for the last 6 months and where we were seeing good traction, where we weren't, and having those insights pulled out by AI and saying like, hey, did you know that on days where you do X, you're better off, or when you train like this, you seem to have a better response as a result of it. I think that's where the real value will lie, at least in the short term, from what I can tell. And what I'm interested from you, Brennae, is do you see an evolution from that? Like that's the foreseeable future. That's I guess, the known future. But do you see something beyond the edge of that we're going to get to that really excites you?
Yeah, this is such a great question. We're still in the like very baby phases of this, right? Like this is
Yeah.
still extremely new, and even for folks who've been, on the quote cutting edge, and they've been wearing these wearables since the Apple Watch first came out, and then the Garmin, and we have all of these different wearables that now that I go to a classroom and half the people there are wearing some kind of watch or ring, which I think is really incredible because if you look even 5 or 6 years ago, that definitely wasn't the case. So these systems are becoming more ubiquitous, and as they do, and more people are contributing data, um, we're just going to see just the enormous potential of these pattern recognition systems, of these abilities of these systems to be able to cluster people into groups based on different physiological and behavioral characteristics, and the insights that can be garnered from that are really incredible. If you look at, I'm going to take language models as an
Please. Yeah.
example because this is very pertinent, right? Language models, if you look back, 6, 7 years ago, language models were dead, right? Everyone was like, oh, this is never going anywhere. We are like stagnated as a field. People were told not to get their PhDs in any kind of text generation because it wasn't feasible. And then when you pair some novel architectures with a large amount of data, we're talking data the size of the internet, right? The massive amounts of text data, and you pair that together, and then you get ChatGPT, which you can say what you want about ChatGPT, but it has been a pretty revolutionary technology in terms of language generation. I mean, if you go and interact with ChatGPT, it is almost a magical experience because it can generate text at a scale that before was not even seen as feasible. And that's like a 7 year-ish time frame. And so we're kind of at the beginning phase of these wearables still. And so as we collect more data on people and get a better understanding of people's physiology, it's only going to scale from here. And the insights we'll be able to get will be so much greater than what we have available right now. Because you or I can kind of look at our data right now and, get a decent understanding of it and say, oh, well, on this run, my heart rate variability went down afterwards. And so, here, maybe I need to, adjust my pace in this way. And so you can go in and do this from a very personalized aspect right now. But as you think about incorporating data from multiple people, it can be like, oh, well, there are thousands of people who all, have a particular set of characteristics, and they follow this training plan, and they are able to succeed at running a 100-mile race, for example, right? And so once you start to have this data at scale, you're able to create such greater insights, and that's where I think things are really exciting. And especially as we start to have more and more sensors, right? Sensor technologies are still developing. And as we incorporate more sensor technologies and higher resolution data, because our hardware is getting better and more efficient, then that data accumulates. We have more data and more understanding about our bodies and our bodies in sport.
Yeah, wow. It's insane to think about. Speaking of wearables, you teach classes. How many people are in Meta glasses in your classes?
Are in, sorry?
Meta glasses. Are they recording? Or, yeah.
No, I don't think any of my students are wearing Meta glasses at this point. Those
Okay.
I know it's a buzzword right now, but those glasses are still pretty expensive. So if people have them, I don't think they're wearing them to class.
Fair enough. I mean, it'd be like, listen, when I was in med school, everyone wanted their lectures recorded, and thankfully we got them and would watch them back. So it wouldn't surprise me if they did that, but I'd probably want a proper recording, not my Meta glasses. But jokes aside, we were talking offline wearables before. You're an Aura Ring user. You
Mhm.
mentioned that it gave you some insights. Can you share this story? I think this is great in terms of where we're getting from a health standpoint, but that, health will inform sport as well, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a few years ago, I was, diving into the literature around smart rings. I have a smart ring, had a smart ring, an Aura ring, and diving into the literature, what I found was that there were several studies where the Oura ring or some kind of smart ring was able to determine when somebody was pregnant before a pregnancy test told them. And so, of course, I'm a total data nerd. And so looking at the data and the charts of this, and, I didn't think much of it until a few months later when I was looking at my own data from the Oura ring, and I see my temperature, had this exact same curve as I saw in the paper. And I instantly knew. I was like, I'm pregnant. And
Wow.
it was like a total surprise. So what ended up happening is this was obviously before a pregnancy test would tell me. So I was like, I know I'm pregnant. A few days later, a pregnancy test did confirm it, and now my son is almost 3 years old. So this is like his like part of his origin story is the Aura ring actually told me I was pregnant before I was.
I mean, but when you think about that, that's so helpful because you didn't know you're pregnant. You had no way to know you were
Mhm.
pregnant except for the
Yeah.
Oura ring. There was
Mhm.
any number of reasons you might have gone out drinking that night, right? So if we, no, I'm
Very true.
serious. Like,
Yeah.
and so this early detection, even if it's a false positive, is super positive for society in terms of like the development of your child and all those things, right? So I think there's a lot here. Thinking about it, everyone wants to predict injury, and everybody of a physiology background is allergic to those terms, right? Because everyone's going, it's not possible to predict injuries or those sort of things. But uh, it's foreseeable in the future that we can get close to at least high risk
Mhm.
situations and limiting
Yeah.
those. And I think that's we're nowhere close to that. Is my opinion. I don't know how you
Yeah.
feel about that, but uh, yeah,
Renee,
I'm
before David asks his next question, I want to leave you with something. I don't want you to forget this. If your son ever thinks about becoming a professional athlete, 100% Aura is going to be the company to sponsor him. He's got the ultimate sponsor pitch to them. Like, it does not get any better than that. It's like, he will be a lifetime sponsored athlete there. Sorry, carry on, David.
No, I mean, I totally agree with you. And, the origin story goes beyond that, because 2 weeks before that, I was attempting a 100-mile race, and I was so sick during it. And I never get sick during races. I'm never nauseous during races. It was so confusing. I actually ended up dropping at 70 miles because I was so sick, and I had no idea why. I was so confused. But it turns out I was pregnant, and I didn't know it yet. So his origin story goes deeper than that. So, Aura Ring, a
Well,
you
I'm
got a
sure
future athlete there.
I'm sure that there's maybe not your mother, but some mothers would have been like, of course she's pregnant, right? That's
I, that human intuition, right?
yeah, exactly. The human AI, or the just the eye, the intelligence. I love that. I love that thought. Both the sponsorship and the 100 mile. I think that's the last time we talked. I remember talking to you about that DNF, and I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty bad. And then I remember hearing you tell me a little while later you were pregnant. So I didn't know that story. That's cool to put them together. But speaking of I mean, we've been pretty bullish on it to this point in the podcast. Is there
Mhm.
anything that concerns you in the AI space for sports specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of so especially around the use of these large language models, these chatbots, a lot of research has come out very recently, even in the last couple of months here, showing that people of different demographics get very different responses from one of these large language models. And these biases are integrated into these systems, not by the model providers on purpose, but through the data that they're trained on. So any biases that already exist on the internet exist at large, those are going to be propagated in these chatbot systems. So, for example, a study came out in August that showed salary negotiation with male personas and female personas with one of these or actually they looked at all of the different chatbot systems. So looking at like ChatGPT and Claude, Gemini, all of these major providers of these chatbots. They went back and forth with these chatbots, provided personas the exact same factual information, except male presenting names and female presenting names. And then it was, asking them like what kind of salary should they negotiate. And there was a significant difference across all of the models between the salary recommendations of the male personas and the female personas, even though all of the factual information was exactly the same. And so, these biases, like they slip into the models, and you can imagine this in sports being propagated as well. And there being challenges, I think, especially of our like multi-sport athletes, right? And their persona in one of these chatbot systems may be, very much affiliated with one of their sports and not one of their others. And the training advice that you give to multi-sport athletes is very different than the training advice that you give to one versus the other. So that's one example. You can look at the presenting gender with a chatbot, and there could be potential issues there. So when you're using a chatbot, really important to be very conscientious of the fact that there are biases integrated into these systems already. This is not like making a Google search, right? I think a lot of people think, oh, ChatGPT is just a replacement for a Google search. However, it's like a Google search, but you're always clicking on the first response in Google search. And I think anybody who's done a Google search realizes that you often scroll down the page a little bit, right? You don't always click on that first link, but ChatGPT is kind of like clicking on that first link, and what you get, is like what's going to be shown to you.
And I
So
mean,
that is, go for it, David.
no, I was going to say, like, the Google search is an appropriate example, because do it next time you do a Google search, do one straight after in incognito mode, and see what
Mhm.
happens, and you'll find that
Yeah.
the results are different because Google presents it to you as you are, right? And so, or do
Mhm.
it on your spouse's thing
Yeah.
and see what comes up, and it'll be slightly different. So I think it's worthwhile noting that it's to some degree a reflection on you and in what it's trying to
Mhm.
find answers for you, which is maybe helpful, maybe not. It's done with best intentions, right? But
Mhm.
but as you say, like, all these models are trained on the internet, and the internet has
Mhm.
biases that reflect society. So that ultimately, this is going to reflect back society. It's not going to be sterile,
Yeah.
unless you build a model. I don't know how you feel about Notebook LM, but to me, that's been something that I'm a little bit more interested in, because it's
Mhm.
you feed it the data, and then it's a model built on that. But I don't know how you feel about that. It's something I certainly think from a scientific perspective is got an upside in that you decide what it gives you answers based on.
Yeah, Notebook LM is a favorite tool among my students. It is, such a great educational tool. The way it works is that behind the scenes, you actually still have one of those large language models that was trained on the corpus of the internet, but then you're basically seeding it with a bunch of information that you give it. And so it's much more likely to grab information from the content that you provide to it. So you're grounding it, quote, grounding it in a way that allows it to pull from that information. Now, 999 times out of 1,000, it's going to do that. But one time out of 1,000, it might pull from its, database that it is, trained on from the internet. And so, that is important to be thoughtful about as well.
Yeah, okay. I did not realize that. I thought it was, yeah, okay. That's super helpful. I'm learning a lot here. Thank you. There's a, you built a disagree bot. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can we,
What is this?
Let's talk about this because there's a lot of value here. What is it? And then we'll talk about it.
Yeah. So if you've gone through and played around with one of these large language model like chatbot applications, I call them chat AI applications, so I don't have to name a specific provider. So if you play around with one of these chat AI applications, you're going to hear terms like, "That's amazing. You're so right. You are incredible," right? Like you hear all of this stuff that just pumps you up, and anything that you're putting into the system, it's reflecting it back at you and basically telling you're awesome, even if you put in something like that doesn't make a lot of sense. And this is personalized to each person. So think like, two partners are having an argument, right? So let's say, you guys are putting together your podcast, and Xylan, David, you guys are having some kind of argument about like how you want to structure the podcast. I know you guys never argue, so this is.
I was going to say it sounds like
a hypothetical example. But let's say that David goes to his ChatGPT and is like, being like, Xylan said this, and no, but I think it's this, and he goes through, and ChatGPT is like, David, you are so right. Xylan is completely wrong in this situation. You are thinking about this perfectly. Meanwhile, Xylan's over there with his chat AI application, and he's typing in, he's like, David said this, but I think it's this, blah, blah, blah. And then chat AI says to Xylan, Xylan, you are completely right. David is totally wrong about this situation, right? And the challenge with this is something we call sycophancy. So we call it AI sycophancy, where an AI basically tells you what you want to hear. It's going to tell you that you are completely right. It's not going to challenge you in the way that you'd like to be challenged unless you explicitly say, I want to be challenged on this, or please provide critical feedback to me. And so what I did is an exploration of this, an educational tool or a public engagement tool, if you will, is I built a chatbot that is intended to disagree with you, no matter what you say to it. If you say the sky is blue, it's going to disagree with you and be like, well, actually, the sky is not always blue. The sky is sometimes purple or red. And then it's going to go into a scientific or philosophical explanation. It's really funny, right? If you put in 2 + 2 = 4, it's going to say, well, that's based on, this particular, the Archimedes mathematical context. And it's going to pull in some ideas from other mathematical structures and constructs.
We all have friends like this. Right now, we're thinking of friends in our heads that is exactly like this chatbot.
Exactly. So you can go and interact with DisagreeBot and just know that you're always going to be disagreed with by this chatbot. And it's more of, almost like an artistic piece of trying to get people to be like, oh, I didn't even realize that my typical chat AI application is so sycophantic. It is telling me I am right about everything. So what I like to have people do, and I have students in my class do, is I pull up chat AI application on one side, DisagreeBot on the other, have the same exact argument, and compare them. And when you compare them, the results are really striking, where these systems are extremely sycophantic and DisagreeBot is, telling you how it is.
That's so interesting. But the reason I bring
I
this
want to
up is
I want to tell
you
listeners
go.
now, if you aren't thinking of a disagreeable friend in your mind, I don't know how to tell you. You probably are that friend. like, but also it's I find it so interesting because it's also a metaphor, I think, for how we are as humans. Like if we're having a debate, and David and I do this often, I think I'm right in my mind. He thinks he's right in his mind. I think that's human, and that chatbot is almost like your consciousness, like you bringing your point across the whole time, and that consciousness telling you in the back of your mind, Jess, I'm right, I'm right, until I
Mhm.
don't know what it is eventually that breaks through that for you to see that you might not be, that I might not be right.
Well, there's so one of our listeners, friend of mine, Owen Kremen, is in this space. He's doing his PhD, and I'm going to butcher this. My apologies to Owen. He's a physiotherapist by training, now doing his PhD in decision making, and a lot of what he's building is actually disagreement in this.
Mm.
Because one of the biggest challenges you have, particularly in medicine, is this exact thing: is everyone agreeing and no one questioning
Mhm.
a diagnosis, for instance.
Yeah.
And so I saw a case. I can't share too much, but basically, this person ended up in hospital for quite a while getting antibiotics because of a misdiagnosis. And I happened to have seen something similar previously, given the context. And I was like, "Hey, actually, are we sure it's not this?" And then getting a bit more history, talking about it, making sense of it. It was like, "Oh, actually, that was a misdiagnosis we made." And so until you have somebody who can make sense of it, or question if we're doing something, you're always, good practitioners can do this for themselves perhaps, but it's really important to not have, yes men or sycophants around
Mhm.
you at all
Yeah.
times in any situation, be that professional, personal, whatever, right? Is you need somebody who's going to question you, because even if it just means you justify your position
Mhm.
and you've thought it through, then it's super helpful. So like there's this concept of red teaming. I'm not sure if you've come across it, but it's basically like,
Mhm.
what's the opposition going to be doing here, or thinking, or saying? And that I think is super helpful in sport to have. If you build a game plan, you're like, this is how we want to play the game plan, and the bot goes, well, no, this is why you shouldn't be doing that, or this is what the opposition want you to do, or something like that. So I think there's certainly some role here for those things, because the problem with doing that as a human is you may not last that long if you disagree with the coach that much. Right? If
Yeah.
you're an assistant coach and you spend your life disagreeing with the coach, they probably don't want you around, because there's lots of psychological and human factors involved, both around psychological safety and do you want my job, and why everything's harder when you're around, all that stuff, rather than you're trying to help me. So there's,
Mhm.
there's a lot here in the sporting realm. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and this becomes really challenging when people are using these systems as coaches, right? Which a lot of people are starting to use these chat AI applications as their coaches. You want a coach to disagree with you, right? Like you should be going to a coach because you don't know everything. If you know everything, then you can coach yourself, right? I'm saying that completely hypothetically because nobody knows everything. Um, However, if you're using one of these systems as a coach and you're like, I'm really thinking that what I need to do is go from, I'm running 0 miles right now, but I think next weekend I'm going to run 20 miles. And, one of these systems is going to be like, that's a great idea. You should just run 20 miles next weekend after, running nothing for the last like 6 months here. Right. I mean, this is a big challenge. And so for anybody who's in the audience who is like, I'm going to create the next like personalized coach system with an LLM, that's great. But you better be thinking about how to ensure that your model provides that friction and challenge and disagreement to your user, because the way these systems are trained, they lean very sycophantic.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating. And I for those listeners who saw my face when you mentioned for those people using it as a coach, I was thinking about Zylan and some of the discussions we've had recently about him being coached by ChatGPT. So uh, he's doing a better job of it than you made it sound like. But yeah, there is interesting data around pure factual knowledge, and I'm sure you've seen this data around gym programs, nutrition
Mhm.
plans, this stuff where it's going to be pretty good because the internet exists and so do all the textbooks on the internet. So like
Yeah.
regurgitating that information is not difficult, particularly let's say a
Mhm.
gym program for basic stuff. It's
Yeah.
really simple. Like, I was doing that in first year university. So like it's
Mhm.
not difficult information. A good high school student could probably do it. But when you get to advanced stuff, as you say, it gets challenging around loading. And then certainly if you have a bias going in, it's probably not going to help in that context.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to like set up a plan in the beginning, right? If you're like, give me, a 10-week plan, it's going to pull from 10-week plans all around the internet, right? Give me a 10-week plan to run, 15 miles. amazing. It's going to give it to you, and that's great. The problem comes when you use it more like a coach and you're like, hey, like I'm feeling kind of injured right now. Should I still go on a run today? Right? Or I twisted my ankle, like when should I start running again? Or like, I'm starting from zero and I want to run 20 miles tomorrow. Can you give me a plan? Right? So it's where you shape that like beginning part. If you're saying, hey, like I want to run 15 miles in the next year, what should I do to do that? That's great. And it's going to give you a canned plan from the internet, but it's those like nuanced responses that it won't necessarily have the right answer for or a good answer. And so that is where things can potentially cause problems.
Brenna, I want to ask you. I'm working in African cycling development, developing talent on the African continent, and we want to do it on a big scale. David's helping with this as well, so maybe he has some input in this. But how can AI help play a role in that, in maybe fast tracking our progress or easy wins? I think it's a very broad question, but I think you're so brilliant in your knowledge. You probably have an answer at the top of your head.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what I always tell organizations in general is to think about where your bottlenecks are. And usually, if you do this bottlenecks analysis, you're going to find a bunch of bottlenecks in your. And when I say bottlenecks, I'm meaning things that are really slowing you down as an organization. Like what's keeping you from moving to that next stage? What is causing people to waste a lot of their time? Right? Anything like that within an organization, that is what I consider a bottleneck. And when you have a bottleneck, going through the naive solutions, like what are the naive solutions? And hopefully you've tried all of those already. But if you haven't, you should try those naive solutions. Those solutions that are just kind of out of the box, you can grab and run. But then for some of those more tricky problems, then exploring, how could I potentially use AI to help and augment this, right? Not necessarily to fully replace humans in the loop, but to be able to augment humans to do things faster and better. And I think that's where, from an organizational perspective, AI can be really beneficial.
Yeah. My take to answer the question more specifically, Zylan, the biggest challenge that we're probably going to face is talent identification. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a dearth of talent. We've got tons of kids who ride bikes really well, right? And physiologically are pretty gifted all over the continent,
Mm-hmm.
remotely. So the question, and it's going to take us a while to sort out, is when we have enough data on somebody who's been successful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we now know what success looks like. We also then need to scale it back to what did success look like at 15 for that
Yeah.
person and what characteristics do they have. Now, can we go find that in the data, right? So
Mm-hmm.
get a bunch of people tested and collect data over longitudinally over a period of time and then masses of it so you can spot
Mm-hmm.
patterns that humans can't spot from an early
Yeah.
stage. Like that's the answer to scale, but
Mm-hmm.
that's a 10-year project, maybe more, because we have to see enough people come through, mature, and be successful so that we can see some of
Yeah.
the signal from that noise, because it's going to be very noisy data to start with. And so
Yeah.
that's probably how talent. I mean, listen, I'm sure, having spoken to other cycling organizations in some other work I'm doing, this is happening in other parts of the world already. So
Mm-hmm.
it's certainly got precedent. We've got a different challenge to them. They need to spot talent and acquire it early because they don't want to miss talent. They're fighting for the same talent. We don't have that same problem. We have a where do we spend our resources talent, because we're
Mm-hmm.
we're under resourced, and that's in every term of that word. When Brinnae mentioned bottlenecks, I was like, money is money the bottleneck we're looking for? Does AI help with that?
Yep.
But jokes aside, that's how I'm thinking about it from a talent ID and development standpoint: is where do we invest resources and how do we
Mm-hmm.
make smart bets in that context? And we don't have the data on that, particularly because we're dealing with it. If we're dealing with Belgian cyclists, we probably have that data because they
Mm-hmm.
exist already. There are
Yeah.
no current, or sorry, there are a few elite level African cyclists that we can look at the data from and go like, that's what they look like all the way along. We only have
Mm-hmm.
what you'd be better at this Samiz Island, but what 10, 5? Like, is that
10. Yeah.
those? Yeah, that's our
10
numbers.
years.
So
Yeah.
you can't take 10 cyclists and find a pattern in that. There's probably 3 patterns or 4 patterns in there that we should be looking for. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the data collection challenge is something that's affecting people across different industries right now, and where people are really thinking about what is that value proposition, that unique value proposition, and a lot of it is in data, right? Is in having the right data, and so starting that collection process now. But it is hard, right? Because how do you decide like where to put the resources to collect that data? Because collecting that data is, very challenging. And so that's where you have, your quote pilot of, 10 folks here, like really diving into their data and trying to understand, from their perspective and even from their family's perspective, like what were they doing at 15, right? What were they doing at 10? And like getting more data on those 10 people. Well, it's only 10 people and it's not going to generalize to an entire population. At least it gives you a good starting point of where to target those data collection efforts. Because, if everyone's like, it came down to like they, all 10 were super motivated at the age of 10 at everything that they did, right? Then a quick questionnaire will help you like start to target people to at least monitor the data on, right? And that is really critical to be able to do that. And so I think, starting with that pilot and just collecting as much data as you can is maybe a good place to start. And
Yeah.
of course, I don't have full context to the situation.
No. That's great advice. And the problem with data collection is the best. I say this a lot in the organization. Anybody who's listening from the organization is going to laugh at me, but I say often, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. It's the same with data collection. The best time to start collecting data was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. We just got to start and just collect as much as we can, and then work out how we sift and sort it later. Because if you don't collect it to start with, you're in trouble. It's actually something I learned in part from you working on a previous startup, Brinnae. You came in and you're like, hey, we got to get this data architecture right for day one, or it's going to be a problem later. And we don't know what we're going to build with it, but we got to get it right to start with, collect it properly, tag it properly, label it properly, so that we can then use it. Because the problem is if you've got bad data or you've got data that isn't tagged properly, it's not so helpful. So it's not as easy to just hand something over to somebody who's technical and go, here's data, sort this out. So
Yeah.
Hey, we were talking before about some aspects of digital safety and privacy. You have a 3-year-old young tyke running around. How do you think about digital safety and privacy, whether it's in the sporting context or elsewhere in, I guess, your life, given and your son's life?
Yeah, this is such a great question. We as a community of people, right, I don't think we realize how much data there is out there on us, and how much it's driving our daily decisions, right? Like I talked at the beginning about how like AI is driving all of these decisions, but underneath that AI is like data about all of us. And that data, everything from, and the amount of data you can get from, just your phone is just incredible. I asked this question to my class. I was like, okay, so, if somebody had said 10 years ago, 15 years ago, hey, everybody, pretty much everybody, is going to be carrying around a device that is constantly pinging satellites and telling you exactly where you are and like a ton of information about you. And everyone is going to not only voluntarily carry this thing around, they're going to pay for the privilege of carrying this thing around. They carry it to the toilet, right? Like people take this thing so that people even know when they're in the bathroom, right? Like, it is crazy that we are so, used to the fact that everybody has this tracking system on them at all times, which is wild. And the amount of data that you can get from this is really crazy. There was a New York Times article that came out a few years ago that showed that just from data on the phone, you can basically track everything about a person's life. You don't have to know anything about that person, but if you just have the data from their phone, anonymized data from the phone, you can find where they live, you can find out where they work, you can find out when they go to particular doctor's appointments, you can find out if they're having an affair, you can find out, all of this information about someone from anonymous data. So even anonymous data isn't so anonymous. And similarly, when we look at physiology data, right, we think, oh, this data is anonymous. But what we find is that there are patterns, right? Like people have unique fingerprints in their data that you can't really anonymize out necessarily. And we have a really hard time trying to figure out how to anonymize data. And so, we live in this world now where data is collected from us at pretty much all times. And the privacy and security aspect of that is just an enormous problem. I tell my cybersecurity students that they have job security for a really long time because these are really big problems that we're only beginning to understand the repercussions of this data collection that is happening on, all of us at scale all of the time.
Yeah, I mean, so I came across a company and I can't remember the name of it, but the guy who started it is something Ben something. My apologies to Ben. Smart dude, love the company. What he's done though is for football again, European football, not American
Mm-hmm.
football. He's from that world. He created a situation where the players own their data. So generally, what happens, and I don't know if anyone knows this, but like if you go to a club, they own all your data basically. The doctor owns the medical data, and the sports scientists own that data. And so the problem then is when you go to a different club, there's no incentive for them to send that data across. So if
Yeah.
you put the player at the center instead, and they own their data and they share it with whoever they want, then as they leave, they keep that data, which is really important because your injury history is your best prediction of future injury. Your strength,
Mm-hmm.
your strength training stuff is really important for injury. Your load, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's super important to have this, and I think it creates a big point of difference for people potentially. Sorry, Zan, you
We,
can ask a question.
no, related to that, with wearables and the amount of biometric data that we as the everyday
Yep.
public generate to, like, who should own that data?
I mean, the answer is you, but you don't. I
The,
mean,
the answer depends on where you live,
yeah,
uh, where you reside, right? In Europe, with GDPR, you have some ownership over your data, at least whether your data can be deleted. But here in the United States, for example, we don't, right? Our data cannot necessarily be deleted if we ask for it to be deleted.
yeah, or it doesn't have to be deleted. It can
Yep,
be, but it doesn't have to be deleted.
exactly. It doesn't have to be.
And so, I mean, there's lots here, Island, but like a good example was what's it? 23andMe just got bought a little
Mm-hmm.
while ago, and your data was sold with that. So unless you decided to get it pulled off and all those things, your data got sold to somebody else, right? And
Well, I'm a client of theirs, so mine did. Yeah, I did that
yeah,
genetic test once with them.
yep. And so unless you pull that down, it got sold, right? And so generally it depends, right? It depends on your view here. So as a cybersecurity person, Brinnae's probably like, that's a nightmare. If your glass half full, you go, well, it's probably being sold to somebody else's in genetics. It's not a big deal. Whatever, whatever, whatever. My data is not that important. I have nothing to hide. Standard statements that we hear all the time, right? Um, it just depends on how you think about that and the nefarious uses for it. Because again, the question is also like you generated a bunch of that. Do you want to sell that, right? Because these companies are valuable. Like Aura's valuation is something 11 billion. Did I see that? Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like with a B, 11 billion. And I was speaking to somebody the other night, and they're like, "Oh, how is it that much?" I said, "Do you know how much data they have?" And they said, "Oh, but they can't sell that." And I said, "Why not? If you sell the company, you sell the data. Like it's owned in the company, so yeah, it can be sold." And I say that as an Aura user who's generated 4 or 5 years worth of data for them. They have all sorts of data on me, so it's a data security, data science, data ownership is really hard in this
Mm-hmm.
context of like, how do we do this? I mean, we worked at a startup previously. This was something we had to navigate, and we had an American team dealing with European customers. And I used to say to them, guys, if they ask for the data, we have to delete it. But no, we don't. I was like, have you read the GDPR? We have to do this. So
Yeah.
it's a real challenge, but I do think that having a better understanding, I don't want to call it a digital twin because I think digital twins are right up there with AI with misused terms, but having an idea of all of your data for a progression of life is something that we're starting to see here, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm of an age where when I started running, we didn't have GPS watches, but there are runners now who've never run a step without a GPS watch. Think about the richness of that data with respect to their ability to train a model or give to a coach, right? And then similarly, think about that from a football standpoint. If you've got every minute you've ever played videotaped because you're in the Manchester United Academy from 5 years old, think about what that does as well, both to you and your coaches, but also your opposition. So there's some fascinating thoughts around, yeah, who owns the stuff, how do we use it, good and bad uses, positive and nefarious uses, etc.
Yeah, and David, to one of your earlier points, right, where we had talked about, some of our previous work together and thinking about like labeling the data and how important that is, right? We're collecting all of this data, but how actually useful is it without these, labels and being like very thoughtful about the collection of the data? That's something I think about a lot too. especially in the current paradigm of training a lot of these AI models. Is we need to have labels on the data, right? We need to understand like when people got injured. Is that going to be part of the data, right? Or do you just have like your GPS watch data? That's one, Strava, for example, right? They have all these like labels that you can add, and like all of those labels provide such richness to the data because you can have these different tags, because you can incorporate a natural language right into like a description or even a title. This provides that additional richness to the data that would be make the data even more valuable and useful. So, for folks who are in the business of collecting data, right, and thinking about this data collection from a like organization or a company level, really, really critical to think really carefully about like how you're collecting this data, and are you collecting this data in a way to make this maximally useful later on for developing models off of.
Yeah, because you need context, right? Otherwise, you get
Exactly.
out of Strava data, you get what we always see. Oh,
Mhm.
10% and they get injured. You're like, that's such meaningless data. 10%
Yep.
increase in load, they get injured. It's like there's so much more texture there, but we don't have
Mhm.
the context that's required
Yep.
to deal that texture out. Because if you just look at huge data, only the strongest patterns will come out, and the lack of
Mhm.
context will be very apparent.
Yep.
So it's yeah. There's actually a company in the space, Athletica AI, who we know the sort of co-founders of and one of the data scientists,
Mhm.
and they did a sentiment analysis of comments, and they showed
Mhm.
like you could actually analyze some performance stuff based around the sentiment of the comments that were left by users. I saw this paper published. It was really interesting stuff. So we're
Mhm.
certainly getting there from again natural language models and those things, and that provides such interesting data
Yep.
because the hardest thing sometimes is to get proper use of RPE scales and all those things, right? Which is super helpful to even manual coaches, right? Rather than
Yep.
AI enabled platforms. But if you can do a sentiment analysis as well, or in place of, there's probably some real textured data there that's really helpful, maybe even from just an overtraining standpoint. So,
Yeah. Yeah, the
yeah.
sentiment analysis is really interesting because we know that like people's emotions is really tied to their physiology in a lot of ways, right? Psychology and physiology, they're like integrated together. And when we think about that from a sports context, it's really important. And that's something that a human coach can perceive and understand. We don't even think about it, right? Like we are constantly perceiving other people's emotions. But one of these systems, like it doesn't do that unless you are training a model to specifically do that and you are pulling that information out.
Or it's using your phone camera to look at your facial expressions, which it can do as well and does do. But no, there's a famous story of Alex Ferguson, the coach of Manchester United, and he sat so he could see the car park in his office,
Mhm.
so that he could see how people walked in the morning, and that was like how he told if the guys are ready to go. And that's a great example. You know, other coaches will say things like, "I
Mhm.
say hello to everybody and see how they respond," or shake their hand,
Yeah.
and that's a sense of like how they're doing. So
Mhm.
yeah,
I saw
it's
that
going to be.
in the Ashes this morning, in a sport that Bruno probably would never have heard of, cricket. When Usman Khawaja came into bat, the commentators were like, "He doesn't look like himself. He's not moving as freely. He looks a little awkward." And true to them, he didn't do very well. Like very perceptive. I don't know why I just thought of that when you mentioned that. Just before we dive into the science again, Bruno, a quick human interest question for you.
Mhm.
This world, to us anyway, is all very new-ish. I know a lot of work has been done for many, many years behind the scenes. But what did you want to be when you were little? When you grow up, what did you want to be when you grow up?
Such a great question. As a small child, of course, I wanted to be an astronaut because I think all small children want to be an astronaut at some point, and you go through different phases. But I would say for the majority of my childhood, I wanted to be a journalist and write newspapers. I was always like writing little newspapers for my family and stuff, and so I was always like really interested in like people and news and current events and how different like networks come together. That was always a huge interest of mine. And so that's one of those things that kind of stayed with me. And then I was like, oh, I could be a data journalist, right? As I got older and got really into data science. And then I've done all of these like you're reading my bio. I've done all these like random things. So I think I kind of succeeded, right? Like I get to like poke my head in and learn about all of these different things and see how all of these like networks come together. So I think I succeeded. I will call myself a data journalist. There we
Well,
go.
you do also write a very good newsletter, some of it which is over my head, I might add, but I am a subscriber and I do read it, called Spiller GPT, which we do have a link to in our show notes. So I'd encourage users who are interested in the space to sign up to that. It is free and it is great. It comes every week, and it's a good way to keep the pulse on what's happening in AI. I'm sure that's how you write it. It's certainly how I keep abreast of it. Some of it, as I said, some of it I look at and go, I have no idea what that even. I don't even understand if that's English, but there's some of it where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. I'll investigate that a bit more. So you do a great job of AI journalism, or GPT journalism, so to speak. So yeah, no, that's great. So any more questions from you other than that human interest part? I'm otherwise tapped out. I've gotten so much out of this.
I've got a few questions from ChatGPT, yeah, some of them you probably answered already. I'm gonna rattle them
Easy.
off, three or
Let's
four,
do it.
and then you can decide if you want to answer any of them. You can answer none of them, or you can answer all of them. Athletes generate enormous amount of biometric data. We should own it. We've talked about that. Do you worry about teams? Okay, I'm gonna ask these three in a row, and you can decide what you want to answer. Do you worry about teams using AI to push athletes past healthy limits? How do we avoid a future where wealthy professional teams with the best AI models dominate? And then what ethical guardrails do you believe sport needs immediately?
Uh, I got
Wow.
answers to the first two straight away.
Oh
Yeah.
man. These are interesting. In terms of, I think the probably the most actionable one is the third one, and kind of the hardest one to answer. But I think it is really, really important to have a basic understanding, a conceptual understanding of how these systems are working and the risks and limitations and opportunities of using AI. Especially, in sports where, our data is constantly being collected at this point, right? Where we have all these watches on us, we have, maybe our phone connected to something, we've got like these video things that they're doing pose estimation on us, to really understand like what is the data that is being collected, what is the security and privacy. We talked a little bit about that. What are the risks and limitations? But I think each individual person needs to be aware of that and be very thoughtful about their use of different technologies and who they are giving their data to, and to just be, conscientious of that. It comes down to like trust, and you can't really necessarily trust an AI model, but can you trust, what you do trust is another human, right? So if you look at, the people behind the companies that you're giving data to, do you trust them, right? Do you trust them to do the right thing with your data? And maybe that answer is yes, and that's great, and then you can continue, giving your data to them. Or maybe the answer is no, and then you need to be a little bit more thoughtful about it.
I know
So
that you've left certain social networks, and that worries me because you are someone who is in the know. And if you're leaving it, it's for a reason. I should probably leave it too.
Yes, it's
Uh,
she is the person running away from the fire, and we should all be following her. It is
yeah.
very. But to answer your question, Dylan, I don't think there's a concern about people doing too much with AI, and the reason I don't think that is because that risk exists already. And I think if anything, AI makes it less likely, not more likely. Like there are already coaches who do too much with athletes. I don't think AI is going to make them do more. In terms of like AI powered, yes, like yeah, sort of different money. It's less about money and more about regulations. So where are the countries where they'll use more unhinged stuff? They're the ones where we're going to see more unhinged AI coming from, and therefore more powerful AI that does more stuff. And that exists already. I promise you, I know of some of these things in sport. I can't say anything more than that, but there are certainly places and teams and organizations that have got unhinged AIs that are like blowing what we can do where we are out of the water.
What do you
Um,
mean unhinged?
Less regulation, less concerns, less laws, and therefore can do stuff that ours can't. And
less regulated now though, right? And this is the beautiful thing about sports, is you have your own self-regulating bodies, right? You don't have to rely on, a government of certain countries to come together to decide on anything. As a sports community, right, for each individual sport, you can define this the same as with steroids or other performance enhancing drugs, right? Come together as a community and we ban certain things. Same thing with shoes, right? Like certain shoes are banned, certain
Mm.
types of exoskeleton type things are banned from, competitive running. And so the same thing will happen with AI. I have no doubt about that in sports, is that that will happen at some point. So right now we're seeing,
Interesting.
unhinged things perhaps, and a lot of challenges there. But I think the big question is, what are sport regulators going to do next? How are they going to think about AI and the use of AI, and are they informed to do it? So if you are somebody who, on the
Yeah.
call, who is in, regulation, like, please be informed about these technologies. Please, like, bring somebody in who understands the technologies to help you think about this from multiple different perspectives. It is really, really critical to get this right, because you are driving the future of your sport and the potential, boundaries of human and AI.
Wow, that is just unbelievable. I did not think we were going to go there. That's unbelievable. Thank you. Like that's well, no, I was just like glass half empty. Like this is cooked. It's unhinged. It's out of the the cat's out of the bag, or you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. But you're right. Like people can regulate it now. If you think that there's a bunch of a bunch of organizations that'll sit down and agree on something, I don't know, but let's be hopeful, right? If, as you say, we have examples where this has happened and examples
Yeah.
where it's worked, so there's no reason this can't be one of those. So I think it's a great note to end this on. Thank you so much for your time, Brinnae. That's amazing. We do have links to you in the show notes. We have a link to your newsletter. I have a link to your website, which has links to ways for people to contact you, including sport legislators who want to understand AI. So thank you, Brinnae, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you. So enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This was a lot of fun.